Dr. Torkil, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be talking to Australia.
I'm very excited to dive into your new book, but before we do that, I was reading over your bio and there's a lot of great, interesting things about you in there. So you're a doctor, you're a photographer, you're a filmmaker, and an author. Can you tell me a little
Yeah,
bit about yourself and how that's all happened?
I think it all happened because I was mainly interested in becoming a doctor to live a free life. I've been traveling around Australia. I had been traveling around the world, and I understood that as a doctor, I would be able to work anywhere. I knew that in Norway, where I'm currently working now, I could work as a freelance doctor. I could do just what I've been doing for 26 years. To go into the districts like I am now, I'm on call 24/7 for a week. Then I can go home. I can do whatever the next like 3 or 4 weeks, and then go back again. So I actually was inspired by traveling to become a doctor. So it was not the interest in health in itself, but the way it could make it possible for me to travel so much and still have an interesting job.
Mm,
Because I thought that as a doctor, you're on the front row of life, and you can see how people live, what they do, and you have access to their full life, so to speak. So that was the interesting part for me. And somewhere along there, I got interested in photography, doing my own photography, and also teaching photographic workshops around the world. So I've been teaching 60 photographic workshops. I've been to Ethiopia, Cuba, Sri Lanka, Palestine, Morocco, France, all over. And that was also important because when you're a doctor, you only see sick people. So you think that, okay, that's your universe. And when you work as a photographer, teaching photography, then you see the very healthiest people, the ones that are able to go halfway around the world, pay a lot of money, dare to expose their pictures to people they have never met before. So going back and forth from sick people to healthy people and back and forth again, I understood, I think, more than I could just understand by just working with sick people. So the first book I wrote was actually The Camera Cure, about how to use photography as a therapeutic tool. And while I was doing that, I became aware that we have an autonomic nervous system that we should consider more, that we have kind of overlooked pretty much as doctors, probably because we couldn't measure it. Doctors, we like things we can measure, right? We only take seriously things we can measure, unfortunately, or that's a tendency. And then I understood that we have things to measure the autonomic nervous system, which is heart rate variability. So that is actually kind of a detour into heart rate variability, which my last book is about, the Pulse Cure, on how to use the heart rate to track our stress balance. And the heart rate can tell us whether we are in the relaxed parasympathetic state or in the stressful sympathetic state by watching heart rate variability. And so that was my way actually into how to use wearables
mm.
for health reasons.
Can you explain heart rate variability for those that don't know?
Mhm. So heart rate variability is the variations between heartbeats. And our autonomic nervous system is the base of our nervous system that we share with all vertebrates and mammals. It's kind of a really ancient system, maybe like 300 million years old or somewhere around there. And it's important to have a balance in this system. When we are in the parasympathetic state, the restful state where most of the recovery takes place, then when we breathe in, the heart rate goes up a little bit to take advantage of the extra oxygen in the lungs. And when we breathe out and there's less oxygen, obviously, then the heart rate slows down a little bit. So there will be like a wave form to the heartbeat when we are in the restful state. But when we are in the stressful state, then the heartbeat beats like a metronome, like a clock. And that is because it's like this ancient organism thinks that this organism has to survive the next moment. And we have to use all available forces regardless of we are breathing in or out. And that is how the wearables can then keep track of whether we are in the restful state or in the stressful state um, in the moment and accumulated across the day and weeks and months. So it will give us insight into whether we have a sustainable stress level or not. So they will use, algorithms, they will use numbers from millions of users, they will use artificial intelligence, and then by having the wearable on your wrist or on your finger as a ring, it will tell you the heartbeat, your movement pattern, your oxygen level, and your temperature. And from those biometrics, combined with algorithms, they can tell us so much about the state of our body and giving us as people rather than doctors the control and insight into our health.
And what insights would you get from that?
Maybe the most important that we have the insights into our stress levels,
Mm.
because what is killing us now, that's our own stress level. It's too much too much activity compared to recovery, and our immune system is just not made for that. So it will underperform and lay the ground for all kinds of diseases.
Mm.
So that is why it's probably when you have control of this, you have a sustainable stress level, your body does the healing, and you will not, or you will reduce the chances dramatically for getting the lifestyle diseases that we have these days.
Mm. Can you touch on stresses? Because it's hard to know what's a stress for your body. So working out's a stress, work can be a stress, life, kids, all that sort of stuff can be a stress. Is there good, bad stresses? Does your body adapt to some and not to the others?
Yeah, good question. And because what becomes apparent once you start tracking your heart rate is that the stressors come from surprising sources. I used to think that I we learned in medical school that the autonomic nervous system is fight, flight, and freeze, the sympathetic state, or rest and digest. And I was never scared. So I would just have to assume then that I would be in the rest and digest state. Once I started tracking, I saw that I'm in the stress state almost all the time. How can that be? And by and by, because I started using an ECG monitor for 2 years before I understood that Garmin had the same system in their watches. And I saw that the stress for me, that was alcohol, it was not sleeping enough, it was the food I was eating, that was the major part, and at the times of day that I was eating. Those were the biggest stressors. And also, exercise is stressful, but it's kind of an investment. You get returns for it. And yeah, so it was the totality and my also that I didn't have any ways to mitigate the stress. I had not yet learned how to use cold, how to use breath work to calm myself down. So it was a combination. I learned how to relax better and measurable in heart rate variability. It was not just a relaxation that I was, thinking or or guessing. I could measure it. I could see it. Okay, so this is relaxation. Okay, suddenly it was another level than what I thought, right? And yeah, and I could identify the stressors like chili. Suddenly I could see that chili is a major stressor for me. And I had never thought about that before. I would never, before I started tracking my heart rate, wake up in the morning at 8 o'clock and thinking that how I feel now is related to what I was eating at 6 o'clock yesterday.
Hmm.
The thought it didn't even cross my mind, so I wasn't even looking for it. But once you start tracking, you see these things um, from your monitors. So and you were asking good or bad stress. Um, Mainly, stress is good for you, no matter what, as long as you can compensate by enough recovery.
Hmm.
So even stress that you don't want or is uncomfortable, is also able to build you up. Um, but mainly, what I think is good or bad stress is good stress is something that builds you stronger once it's over and you allow it to recover. Bad stress is stress that just saps you of your forces and gives nothing in return, which would be food that creates inflammation in your body. It would be alcohol that just creates, okay, some hours of fun maybe, but days of reduced recovery.
Hmm.
So when you see the physiological price of alcohol, it's so much easier to decide whether you should have that drink or not. And for me, I'm drinking maybe 4 times a year now. I used to drink every day. I used to have 2 glasses of wine every day because that was doctor's recommendations at the time.
Hmm.
And I remember in Australia, we were buying this cool about this big wine casks, you know, it was cheap. I remember. So I was enjoying that, that it was even recommended by doctors. Now, of course, we understand that this was it was confounded by the fact that the ones who were drinking alcohol every day was probably more social than others. And now we know the effect of being lonely and being social on our stress levels. So it was not the alcohol in itself, but the fact that it pointed to a social person.
Hmm.
Yeah, alcohol is the worst stressor of all. So I have the Whoop band on my one wrist here, and they take in information from their users, and they say that alcohol is the worst stressor of all.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. So why did you start tracking in the first place, and how long ago was that?
That was now 6 years ago. By coincidence, I became aware that there were these trackers. I had the same summer or 2019, I was in French Polynesia sailing with my family, and one of the books I was bringing and reading was The Body Keeps the Score by
Mm.
Bessel van der Kolk, a huge like multi-million bestseller. And he's a psychiatrist, and he was talking about how they used heart rate variability as a measurement of the state of their patients. So I had never heard of that, even as a doctor. It was a totally new concept to me, and that you could measure the autonomic nervous system that I had already understood the importance of from the camera cure writing process. So I understood that this is huge. This is incredible that we can measure this system. That is very, very important information. And when I came home, shortly after I came home, I became aware that we had these ECG monitors that I could tape to my chest, and 24/7 I could get an insight into this system that was just, the best you can get. The ECG is so accurate. And for 2 years I was using that, and there was no guidebook because the Pulse Cure is the world's first guidebook into how to use heart rate variability uh, come and connected to lifestyle changes or factors. So I had to find out everything for myself. So for 2 years, I had, 700 readings, finding out, what gets me into the parasympathetic mode, what gets me into the sympathetic mode, and how much. So for 2 years, I did that, and it was just for myself, to become healthier. And somewhere along the way, the publisher that had published the Camera Cure, Norway's biggest publisher, became aware that I was doing this and just asked me if this could be a book for them. So I don't think they totally understood what I was doing. Nobody understood. I was just weirdo, walking around checking my heart rate with this monitor on my chest. It looked like I was wearing having a pacemaker or something, underneath a short shirt. So I looked quite weird. Um, but it became just an incredible bestseller. It's still today on the bestseller list, more than 2 years after its release, and is uh, still interviews 2 or 3 times a week, still lectures, still podcast um, from that book. So in Norway, it's been just an extreme bestseller. It's kind of a phenomenon that, because what this does is it takes the power and the control of your health from the doctor and the healthcare system and puts it literally into your own hands, and gives you the opportunity to take control, and you will feel it immediately. Particularly the ones who are challenged by symptoms and diseases, or brain fog, fatigue, and all the stress related symptoms, that you will feel it within a couple of weeks. You would understand the problem, because with many of these diseases, we as doctors have any lab tests. Nothing will show that you have brain fog. Nothing will show that you're in the fatigue situation. But this shows it. Here you can see it, and then it becomes visible for yourself and your doctor or practitioner, and it becomes manageable because suddenly you can regulate this. When you see where this stress balance is, you're able to do something about it.
And you going through this process of doing like wearing your ECG and learning and doing all these readings, what was the process of learning how to, fix that or get a better heart rate variability?
Yeah, I just had to isolate things that I was doing. Okay, so for example, if I was doing push-ups and then having my dinner, I wouldn't know whether it was the push-ups or the dinner that made
Mm.
the stress. So I would learn how to separate different factors. And what is really useful for me is to work just like I am doing. Like here, when I work here, I'm on call 24/7. There's not so much I can do. So and being a doctor is the calmest thing for me. So I would have a baseline that was really in the parasympathetic mode. Once I understood about diet, that I couldn't tolerate gluten very much or milk very much, and certain foodstuffs. Once I understood that, once I understood alcohol, once I understood that I had to take away nicotine. In Norway, we use some kind of nicotine we put in small bags, put under our lips.
Mm.
I don't think it's very common around the world. And those were the big stressors. Once I could take those out, I was suddenly able to see the baseline. And then I could do different things, and then I could see clearly the level of stress a certain thing would have on me. And then I was writing about that in the book. The different variables that you can look for to see if they affect your stress levels.
Mm.
So that was the process, just a detective work, because the heart rate responds quite quickly to any stressor. So you would just have to find out what stresses me now. You just see that in the moment, wow, the stress is high, and you have to look, okay, what am I doing? What did I do? What did I do yesterday? How can I have this stress level now? And I must say that the only device that can help you to do this, that is a Garmin watch. So I'm talking about Oura rings, I'm talking about Samsung Galaxy rings, the Whoop band, but the way that I'm describing how to micromanage your stress levels, that is only Garmin really.
Why is that?
Because they have a 24/7 stress levels where you can see on the graphs, you can see on a scale to 0 to 100 your stress levels at all times. So you'll be able to identify, oh, the stress levels yesterday was between 2 and 3 o'clock after I had that dinner with chili, for example.
Mm.
Or the stress levels after the exercise yesterday was much higher than the day before, and you can see that very clearly. For example, maybe you have had alcohol the day before, then exactly the same exercise will give you much more stress afterwards, which I would never have thought of. But it
Mm.
becomes very clear when you see the minute to minute changes in your stress levels. And most of the other devices will only get you an estimate in the morning of your available resources, and will not give you this kind of accurate measurement, throughout the day. So, and still the other haven't done that. The Whoop band and the Aura Ring has a rudimentary, very crude assessment of it, but it's not useful really.
Mm. Are you wearing a Garmin now?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And you got the Whoop as well. And do you wear an
I got
Aura
the
ring?
Whoop, and I got three rings actually. I got the Aura, the Samsung, and the Inspiring, and that is because this is my job. That I need to know the tools that people are using, and I need to compare them to see if they're good enough.
Mm.
And yeah, and so if I wasn't doing this kind of a job, then then I probably would just have the Aura and the Garmin watch. The Aura would be better for sleep, to see the sleep phases, and the Garmin would be better for seeing the stress levels. So those two combined is what I think is the most effective.
But you'd recommend people start with a Garmin so they can see that
Yeah,
in
that
real
yeah
time.
that yeah that will give you 90% of the information you need,
Mm.
and then you may enjoy having the last 10% of the Aura and also have kind of a second opinion. So if there's some funny result that you are not quite sure of, if the Aura also confirms that, you see that, okay, this is real. This is just not just a mistake or some artifact or yeah.
Mm. We were talking before we started recording and how I don't wear any, like I've got rid of
Mm,
all of them. So what do you
mm.
sort of say? I guess I'm getting
If,
convinced now to start to go out and buy a Garmin, but
I've Yeah, if you, I mean, the best thing, of course, would be if people didn't need that, and um, but I think very few people in today's society will put these wearables on and find that they are in this optimal state.
Mm.
They would be surprised. There would be some factor in their life that they would be able to identify and regulate and get better, and then they could continue doing that. So, and if you, for example, if you would decide for 3 months to use a Garmin watch and then not finding anything to improve, you would be the first one, you know, that I've heard of.
No, I
Because
reckon there'd
because
be a
so many
few.
people because so many people in the health conscious community would be familiar with breath work, with cold water therapy, with exercise, with sleep, with all of this. So many of them have also started using this, and from your position, earlier they would be the ones who did not track.
Mm.
And they also find out manufacturers because we're not really equipped to listen to our bodies. We are equipped with excellent eyesight, excellent hearing. We can see 10 million shades of color. We can supposedly smell a trillion different smells. And we have excellent taste, excellent sense of touch. If you have a tiny stone in your shoe, you will feel that because that's a threat, or that used to be a threat. A small wound could be dangerous, on the savannah 50,000 years ago. But you cannot feel whether I have 60 or 80 in heart rate now. I don't know. I have no clue. Uh, I know from experience that it should be around 60, but I could have done something or eaten something that would raise my heart rate, but I would not feel different because if you felt the noise of your inner system throughout history, it would be in the way of the collection of the sensory data from the outside. So it's not only that we have not developed a way to sense our stress levels, it has even been muted to give priority to the outside signals.
Mm. I feel
So
like that's
and that is why people get into a burnout situation, a fatigue situation, and without any warnings. You know, if what threatens us now is high blood sugar, high blood pressure, high stress levels, and there's no alarm signal. If this had been a problem for millions of years, it would be painful to have a high blood sugar, you know. So we're just not equipped to live in the way that we do this in modern times. And but the heart rate will reveal it. So the heart rate will respond to the stressors, and it's kind of a sense that we never had, you know. So it's a substitute for that sense, in so to speak.
Mm. So I'm listening along. I want to get a Garmin. I get a Garmin. I
Mm.
start measuring. What's my next
Mm.
step?
Then you just the first I would recommend, or so, and you would so just get you could get one of the cheaper Garmins, you know, like Forerunner 165. It shouldn't it in US dollars that would be $250 somewhere around that. And then for maybe the first month, don't change anything. The watch will use maybe 3 weeks to find your baseline, to calibrate itself to your system. And maybe for a month or even a month and a half, I wouldn't change anything. Just quietly observe what is happening and try to understand what is happening. And then after that, maybe take one step at a time and to improve it. Because if you are changing three things at a time, you know, you don't know what caused it. You know, as a doctor, it would not be smart for me to start three different medications on a patient,
Mm.
and then suddenly they get some side effects, and okay, then you have to take out one by one and find out, okay, which one gave the side effects here, for example. And it's the same way you need to think, you know, to change one thing at a time quietly and yeah, and most people would quite quickly find out that alcohol is the worst. And as I said, they would find out that late night meals later than 3 hours before you go to bed would be a stressor. They would find that eating, you know, candy. The biggest problem when it comes to food is ultra processed food, and it's also the kind of ultra processed food that is constructed to make you addicted. The hyper palatable food, you know, but that you find by the end of the supermarket when you have worn yourself out by lots of choices and you have no resistance left for temptations, and you buy the chocolate and all of those things. So people will see that even though it feels great to have those foods, you know, you cannot stop almost. It will create stress in your system. So these things you would quite quickly find out.
Mm. While we're sort of in that topic, so these days more and more studies are coming out to show all these foods getting are bad for you, and it's getting worse and worse. Like the more studies are out there, but then chronic disease is still rising. Like, what do you think the
Mm.
disconnect between, you know, all these studies and then people actually taking action to improve their health? What's the disconnect there?
Mm. I didn't understand the disconnect.
Well, it's just like more and more people are being unhealthy, putting on weight, um,
Mm.
chronic diseases, but we know these foods are bad for us. So,
Mm.
what do you think's happening there? So, why are people still eating all these foods, even though
Because
they
it
know?
tastes because it tastes great, and I think most people they're not aware of anything, you know. So there's a sharp, you know, maybe in Norway, one third of the population are concerned with their health. They exercise, they take care of getting enough sleep, they watch what they're eating. But most people don't have any attention towards that at all.
Mm,
They are just falling prey to the commercial uh, from the food industry. They will wait until they get sick, and then the big farm takes their money. And so they're just not paying attention. And the health, I don't know how it is in Australia, but the health authorities in Norway, they're not aware of this. So
Mm.
they are using some 30 years old advice on what to eat. They have not really warning against ultra processed food. So and but what these wearables do is it makes it visible for you, the load and the effect on your system. And because I was really shocked the first time that I could see that the food gives me stress. Who would have thought, And I sent, the curves, I sent the questions to nutritionists that I know, and they had never heard of it, but were not really interested either. So
Mm.
it was like, I just don't mess into our territory here, Just keep to your scalpel, don't mess with this. And but it's very clear that both ultra processed food and food you have a food intolerance to will affect the inflammation levels and your heart rate.
Mm.
So it used to be an old technique, developed by a Dr. Koka in the 50s, an American doctor, the kind of the father of allergic research. And he used to use the heart rate as a way to identify food intolerances already in the 50s. Of course, he didn't have a tracker, but now you can see it quite clearly, and it makes it actionable for you then. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's exactly right. Now that you can sort of use wearables to see what's happening within your body, I think that might sort of start turning the tide, especially because it's so easy to see and anybody can go buy a watch.
Mm.
Like you
Yeah.
said, you
And you
can't.
ask why these other people don't pay. I just think they don't pay attention, and they just and the food that you cannot tolerate is just so tasteful and tempting, and they're overweight. And I think that they're told by the medical community that we can fix you, you can get sick and we'll give you pills
Mm.
and you're all right. But of course it doesn't work like that. And they're just not, I don't know. It's just I think, when I work like I'm doing now, I'm doing the standard job. I'm doing what is expected of me. People come in here, metabolic wrecks, I would say. There would be almost nobody coming into this office every day that is metabolically healthy.
Mm.
And they come to me with 15 different medications. They have 10 different diseases. Going to a specialist in every one of them. It's almost a full-time job by the time you retire. You really need to to have your time available to visit all these different specialists. And here I just observe and give them the pills and refer them to the specialist. But the frustration that gets from this, that I know that they didn't need to get sick. If they had followed the advice in the pulse cure, I wouldn't have seen them.
Mm.
And but I just write the books so that people, if they want to know what to do to avoid getting sick, they have the information there. And
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah. And like you said, it's a bestseller and it's selling like crazy. So obviously people are loving it.
and translated into 7 languages, which is very rare for a Norwegian book. I think it's one of the most translated uh, general or non-fiction books in Norway ever.
Have you got any stories from readers that have changed their life? Like any that stand out to you?
Not that stand out because there's so many. There's so many. I get them every day on Instagram. So it's just a flood of people getting relieved of their symptoms, being able to end their medications, being able to go back to work maybe after years of being in a fatigue situation. So it's but people, starting cold water therapy, getting with maybe rheumatoid arthritis and then never needed their medications, don't have any symptoms, things like this. So, and the pulse cure is you know, it's a, I've collected the best advice on sleep, on movement, on stress management, on how to rest, on nutrition. And what you need to do is a little bit of effort on all of these different factors. So, and then, yeah, you will feel better. You will notice quite fast. So I just get a lot of them every day. Actually, yesterday I was interviewed by Norway's biggest newspaper, and they were asking me to get some people who could tell about um, their experience. And so today my mailbox was just full of people that wanted to be interviewed. And in this article, talking about how rest, because I've written another book since the Pulse Cure that was just released in Norway and it's already a bestseller, about, it's called The Rest Cure. Not yet translated into English. I hope it will happen on the London Book Fair this week. But that is about finding rest, finding measurable rest. So it's kind of taking the 10 pages in the Pulse Cure and making a whole book about it, because what seemed to be difficult for people was to find rest. And and many of the books on the subject, there are many books on the subject, but they're all talking about mental rest or philosophical rest. But I'm talking about measurable rest, that you can actually see that you are in the parasympathetic mode. And and that is the first book about that, in this way. So
So
yeah,
what
yeah,
do
I
you
just
mean?
get a lot of information.
What do you mean by rest?
Rest is being in the parasympathetic state. The parasympathetic state is what we are made to be in most of the time. When we put these variables on hunter-gatherers like the Hadza tribe or the San people in Botswana and Tanzania, we find that they are in the inactivity 10 hours a day in the waking hours. There would be 10 hours inactive. They would be sitting, or squatting. They would not be totally inactive, lying on the couch like we are, like totally,
Mm.
relaxed, but they would be in a relaxed, easy mode. And they would be maybe 3 hours in activity, 1.5 hour in like light activity, 1.5 hour in medium activity, and maybe 10 minutes in intense activity. And so this is the level of intensity and movement and activity that our physiology is constructed for. So that would be then maybe 70% of the day in the inactive relaxed mode. And now, of course, many people will be in the stressful mode, and because of the food, because of the alcohol, because of the social media and everything, even if we are relaxed and inactive, even sitting in a chair or in the sofa, we are still stressed, from these sources. So most people will find that they will be in the stressful state like I did most of the day, at least 70% of the day. So it's totally the opposite. So and we are just not made for that. Our immune system will underperform. It will not identify cancers as easily. It will not be able to resist infections from virus or bacteria or what have you. And yeah, so we need to move. And what is interesting about this new technology is that it points backwards in time. So it points backwards to a lifestyle that we were evolutionary constructed to have. The more we live more like that, under the sun, eating food that our system can recognize as food, being under the sunshine, that's super important. Sleeping at night when it's dark, eating in the daytime when it's light, moving a certain amount of steps or a certain activity, using your muscles, being together with others, having good social relations, all of this, being cold, being exposed to temperatures, both hot and cold, drinking water instead of alcohol or sodas, and all this is free. It's available and accessible to everyone. It's free, it's easy, and it's measurable. And yeah, so it makes it easy for people to understand, and it's socially, then whether you can get or stay healthy does not depend on your wallet. So it's
Yeah, I agree. Super easy things that
mm,
everybody can do.
mm,
Um, a lot of people do get overwhelmed with all the information out there, though. So if you could sort of give one area, whether it's sleep, nutrition, ice, or heat, like where should somebody just start as the easy point that would give them the most
mm.
benefits?
That would be minimizing alcohol to the
Yep.
very, the kind of quote unquote necessary glasses. Maybe it's a wedding or a special occasion or something, but cutting out the unnecessary glasses, and at least understanding the effect, so that you know that according to Whoop, it will take 5 days until you're back again at the same recovery. Okay, so that you know that, okay, I will feel bad the next day, but even then on the fourth day, I will be reduced. And if you then drink twice a week, you will never know what
Mm,
your optimal recovery level is. So that would be alcohol, and it would also be to have a restricted feeding window, maybe of 8 hours, 6 to 8 hours, depending, it's all individual, um, and find that out. That would be the most important thing, and to see the strain from your exercise. So many people are exercising too hard, creating too much lactic acid, needing too long recovery time, and that is one of the numbers you will get from the Garmin. You will get, after a certain exercise, you will get a recovery time. And that is quite accurate, I find. For example, if I run in zone 2, I can run for 2 hours and get maybe 24 hours recovery time. If I do a VO2 max test, where I'm running for maybe 8 minutes to the maximum, I get a 96 hours recovery time.
mm,
From 8 minutes. So the intensity, and especially once you get above 85% of your heart rate, maximum heart rate, then that is creates a lot of lactic acid. It creates a long recovery time. So once you see that, you're able to adapt the intensity and duration of your training, and together with your whole time of stress. So if you have a stressful job, you have a stressful family life, uh, maybe you shouldn't push yourself above the 85% of a heart rate, for example.
mm,
And what would be also very important, we haven't been talking about for women, and you had an excellent episode on menstruation and training and exercise. When you see the load on your system, then it becomes much more easy to see. So the menstrual cycle, the week before menstruation, is a heavy physiological load on your system. It's not just a mood or a feeling, but it's visible in the heart rate variability. And when I see the curves of the heart rate variability from women with PMS symptoms, I see that it is as huge a dip as in a tough COVID infection. So for those women, it's like having a COVID infection a week every month. And if you don't take that into consideration when you dose your training and the intensity, then you will be in the risk of burnout. You have to slow down the intensity of your training the week before menstruation. You have to make sure that even though you are tempted to eat junk food, don't do it. Even if you feel you should comfort yourself with alcohol, really don't do that. And once you're able to mitigate the stress for that week, you will not have the PMS symptoms. So the PMS symptoms is not unavoidable. You can, with stress management, get rid of PMS symptoms.
Mm.
And so that is probably yeah, that is one of the attractions of using the wearables for particularly for women. Yeah.
Yeah. So you did touch on time restricted eating there. What's the benefits of that?
And that is your your digestive system needs a lot of downtime. It's not made or constructed for being at work, from breakfast till late night.
Mm.
So it needs more time to recover than we give it when we are eating, most parts of the day. That we are even recommended from the doctors. At least still here in Norway, a lot of nutritionists say that you should eat, small meals and often. That's
Mm.
terrible advice. It's horrible. And particularly if you eat the amount of carbohydrates, that will just get you into a roller coaster ride with the blood sugar. If you have a CGM attached, like I often have, then you will see that very clearly. That is not a good idea. So when you see when you're eating, for example, 8 hours, then you then have 16 hours of downtime for your uh, your intestines, and that will give them a chance to recover because you have your intestines is really like 8 meters of a very vulnerable system with one cell from the contents of your intestines or stomach or whatever into the bloodstream. So, and these cells will be renewed every 5 days or so. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And while the system is busy digesting food, it's not made for, it doesn't have the time or resources, or at least it will be disturbed, the way of recovery. And so what you do when you allow your intestines to have enough time to recuperate is that the permeability will be lower. So it will keep, the barrier from the gut into your bloodstream more appropriate. And the problem with inflammation, most of the inflammation in our bodies comes from the gut. And that is why also 70% of the immune system and the immune cells are organized along your digestional system, because that is where the war is, from all the different particles that needs to be checked and reacted to by our immune system. So once you give the intestines the chance to optimize to work optimally, then you will not have the same level of inflammation, and you will see it in the heart rate.
Mm.
So it becomes very visible. I can see that because now I stopped eating breakfast. When I quite fast after I started measuring, I stopped eating breakfast. I stopped eating late, and you can see that. So it's also more motivating. So when you see the effect, for example, of cold water, you see the effect of fasting, then it's more motivating to do it, because it's a small, it's a bit of effort, to do these things. And when you see the result, it's more motivating to do it. So it's like a gamification. And I know that, the most common questions I get is, will this just not be another stressor? Will it just not be stressful to pay attention to this? And for most people, it's actually the opposite. It becomes fun. It becomes like a game. So this insight into their own physiology becomes like a game where their own life and health is at stake, not just an avatar in a video game or so. So most people think it's fun, but some people will find that their stress levels are very, very hard to manage. And those are the people with very high load of symptoms and of diseases. So, and they will have a hard time maybe relating to the reality check that their heart rate shows what they're experiencing, and it will be harder for them maybe. But the solution is not to throw away the watch, but to manage the stress levels better. So,
Mm.
and 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 they also need to have a lot of acceptance and patience, and that is often what they don't have. That is often what they have led them into the problems in the first place. So it can be also both. They often need to change what they're doing and their attitudes to what they're doing, their mindset. So so for 5 to 10% of people, it will be a challenge.
It always is. But I always say you can't improve what you don't measure. And I think I need to take my own advice and start measuring my heart rate a bit more and improving my heart. So this has been a great episode. Any final thoughts or where people can find you or where they should go?
Yeah, of course they can they can find the book. I know that in Australia the paperback version, will probably take some time, but it's also an audiobook
Mm.
and it's an ebook. So if you just write in Amazon or wherever you get your books, you just write The Pulse Cure. And we have a website called thepulsecure.com where I have a lecture where you can see the things that I'm talking about because I explain it in a video lecture, how you use the graphs from the Garmin watches and so on. Yeah, and I'm on Instagram, Dr. Torkil, dr.torkil. So I have some information there. So
Perfect. Dr. Torkil,
mm,
thanks again for coming
mm,
on the show. This was a great episode and I'm
mm.
inspired to start measuring my heart rate. So I'm
Yeah,
sure
yeah,
everybody else
thank you.
will be.
Yeah, maybe we could do one again, in a half year or so when and to see if you found out something. That would be cool.
Yeah, I'd love to. That'd be great.
Mm.